Reading from the third canto of Śrimad Bhāgavatam, chapter 26, entitled The Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. I'm reading text number 49. Parasya drishyate dharmo yaparasmi samanvayat ato vishesho bhavanam Parasya drishyate dharmo yaparasmin samanvayat to vishesho bhavanam bhumavevo palakshate Parasya drishyate dharmo yaparasmin samanvayat ato vishesho bhavanam bhumavevo palakshate Parasya drishyate dharmo yaparasmin samanvayat ato vishesho bhavanam bhumavevo palakshate Parasya drishyate dharmo yaparasmin samanvayat ato vishesho bhavanam bhumavevo palakshate Yaparasmin samanvayat ato vishesho bhavanam bhumavevo palakshate
Parasya drishyate dharmo yaparasmin samanvayat ato vishesho bhavanam bhumavevo palakshate Parasya drishyate dharmo yaparasmin samanvayat ato vishesho bhavanam
bhumavevo palakshate Parasya
Parasya
of the cause
drishyate
is observed. Dharma, the characteristics. He, indeed. Aparasmin, in the effect. Samanvayat, in order. Ataha, hence. Visheshaha, the distinctive characteristic. Bhavanam, of all the elements. Bhumo, in earth. Eva, alone. Upalakshate, is observed. Translation. Since the cause exists in its effect as well, the characteristic of the former are observed in the latter. The peculiarities of all the elements exist in the earth alone. Purport. Sound is the cause of the sky. Sky is the cause of the air. Air is the cause of fire. Fire is the cause of water, and water is the cause of earth. In the sky there is only sound. In the air there are sound and touch. In the fire there are sound, touch, and form. In water there are sound, touch, form, and taste. And in the earth there are sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. Therefore earth is the reservoir of all the qualities of the other elements. Earth is the sum total of all other elements. The earth has all 5 qualities of the elements. Water has 4 qualities, fire has 3, air has 2, and the sky has only 1 quality, sound. Om Jnanatirmirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitangscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhana Sute Devi Paramami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhyaeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Parashya drishyate dharmo ya parasmin samanvayat ato vishesho bhavanam bhumavevo palakshate. Since the cause exists in its effect as well, the characteristics of the former are observed in the latter. That is why the peculiarities of all the elements exist in the earth alone. So we have just heard now in this chapter thus far, first a illumination on various elements, and then also how the various elements are connected to the various senses and the sense objects. So we see that if we look at an explanation of Sankhya, it's very fascinating how the world shows these principles of design. You see that there are 5 elements, and there are 5 senses that correspond to these 5 elements. And then there are 5 active senses and 5 knowledge-acquiring senses. And this way, because everything is coming from the same origin, because there is a successive unfolding of the material energy, we see that everything is very much interconnected. So we see here that Earth is unique in its characteristics because the Earth is where one will be able to perceive all the various objects. So as Prabhupada says here, sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. So as we get to the most grossest forms of the material energy, we actually see the fullest manifestation. And that is why, if we read in the Bhagavad Gita, we see that Krishna explains that this material world is explained to be like a reflection. There is a great banyan tree, and that reflection is considered to be what this material energy is. Because the Vedic process of creation explains to us that the process of creation is more accurately understood as a process of manifestation, a process in which the more subtle elements slowly and gradually unfold and give more shape to a gross reality. So even though the origin of the world and the most powerful element is actually sound, the world is actually created by sound, by vibration. But then this vibration, as it enters into the material energy, it undergoes a successive process of transformation. And it goes first there is space, and then sound enters into it. And from sound, we start seeing movement and vibration. From that, we get air. And then once we start getting air, we see that generally then what is generated is friction, some heat. And from there, we start seeing the gradual evolution of fire. And then as there is fire, then we start seeing the process of condensation, the process in which moisture is created. And then we have water. And then as water solidifies, then we have earth. And then in the earth element, all the various sense objects can be perceived there. So that's what we to a large part experience is the world of the senses is the gross world, a world that seems to be very real, but then actually in its origin is very subtle. So, and it is some bodies are really into science. If you get into science, then that is the fascinating thing. It's ironic because 99% of the world is actually empty space. And really, if you go look, what are all these things that we're looking at? What are these things? It's just, to a large part, just vibrations, little atomic particles that are just vibrating. And then some or other, just from this vibration in space, you get the actual gross manifestation. And it looks so real and so solid, but it is, to a large part, just based on subtle principles that have just gone through its courses. The word is used there as the dharma. So each element has its dharma, and as each element does its thing, there's this gradual manifestation of the material energy. But we see that it starts even earlier than the elements. In this chapter, we see that really it started with the Mahatattva and the Ahankar and the Pradhan, like even more subtle elements than space. Even more subtle than space. There are more subtle realms in which things are happening that basically determine the course of the creation. And ultimately we see that the initial origin of everything is that glance, Sa Aikshata, the glance of Vishnu. Just by his glance, that is what really sets that is where the energy comes from, that gives everything life, that starts the whole process going. So the Vedic understanding is very essential to understand that the idea is that the gross is coming from the subtle. Whereas modern science, and really, not really, you can't really say Western science, it's really just in the modern world, and really only in the last 100 years that this has become a tenable option. If we speak about materialism basically means the idea that the subtle comes from the gross, or subtle experience, the mind, the intelligence, all these things, they actually, the most primordial thing and the real thing that originally existed was just gross matter. And then somehow from gross matter, when gross matter gets into the right conditions, then you get life. And then as life develops, then suddenly at a certain point, then you get intelligence, and then you get mind. So the idea that from the subtle elements, the subtle realities are coming from the gross. And this really is what characterizes the modern world, materialistic way of thinking that the gross things are the most important things. The gross things are the primary reality. The gross things are the most important, and the gross things determine, that is what determines the condition of the world. Whereas that is not at all the case. The reality is that it is the subtle things that determine the gross. The conditions of the subtle reality is what will determine the physical reality. And therefore, Prabhupada would always criticize this materialistic solutions where people are trying to fix the world, because the world is crazy. You can just step outside this door and then you can see for yourself what is happening there, or turn on the news and you see what people are doing to one another, the crazy situations that are happening. And then you look at it, and then the solution, but then it is not that we don't care about the condition of the world, but Prabhupada's point is that the problem of the world is not going to be fixed on the material platform. The problem is that the material reality is a creation of the subtle reality. And therefore, the first principle is, Prabhupada says the principal solution, the first thing we have to do is we have to create some Brahmanical members of society, people who are themselves able to start changing the subtle condition, changing the condition of the heart first within themselves, but then also in helping other people change the condition of the heart. Sridhar Maharaj, Prabhupada's godbrother, he used to say that the world of our senses is actually an island of matter that is floating in an ocean of mind. Because the reality is that the subtle realities are much broader and bigger, more substantial. Gross matter is actually just a little fraction of the material universe. And even according to science, I think that the majority of the universe is composed of what they call antimatter, which means they don't really understand what it is. They just know that the actual world of our senses are very tiny. And really the conditions of the world is going to flow forward from the conditions of consciousness, the conditions of the mind of the living beings within this world, specifically humans. So the state of the human beings' minds and hearts are actually what determines, to a large part, the conditions of the world. But in Kali Yuga, people have no proper understanding of the soul, and therefore they have no proper understanding of the mind and the intelligence at all. It's quite fascinating. If you see, people just do not understand how the internal world works and how to properly adjust it. So we see that this materialistic way of thinking, if you can understand that at root materialism basically just inverts the direction. So whereas the Vedic thing says that the subtle is what leads to the gross, the materialistic way of thinking is you always think that the gross is the most important, and you can see it everywhere. You can see if people have depression, what do we think? What is the cause of depression? Now, we think, oh, depression is caused by the chemicals of the brain. That's the problem is the chemicals in your brain that are not functioning properly. So what is the solution? We're going to give you some chemicals in your brain. We're going to give you something that, whatever, either stops dopamine or stimulates serotonin. I don't know what the hormones are and what they're doing, but they think that is the solution. And Prabhupada points out in one purport, Prabhupada says, people think they can understand the functionings of the mind by studying the cerebral lump of matter, the brain. They think by looking at the gross brain, and they think the mysteries of consciousness is rooted within the brain. And the better you understand the brain, then we understand how we can make everyone happy. But the solutions are not working. Antidepressants, we can see, just recently there was an article that came out that said some research that they've done over a long period of time, and they realized that actually it doesn't really seem to work. Antidepressants doesn't actually seem to solve the problem. There's not less depressed people now since they've created antidepressants, because the solutions of consciousness is not going to lie in your brain. It's not lying within the gross. It's lying within the subtle realities of your experience. So therefore, Prabhupada says our solution is character building. Prabhupada says no one is interested in the solution, but he says that is the real solution. What does your character mean? Your character is not situated in your body. It's not situated in your brain. It's not situated in the externals of your life. It's situated in the internal realities of your life. Your values, your faith, the condition of your heart. These are the subtle principles. These are subtle things. If I look at a person, I don't know what is your character. If you walk on the street, you don't know what someone's character is just by seeing them, looking at their outside. Therefore they say, but in Kali Yuga, a man's worth and his character will be determined by what? No? By his bank balance. That is how we will determine, is this a worthy member of society? Is this a good person or not? Does he have money? And you can see, if you have money, practically, you will be respectable in society, irregardless of your actual character. Like, completely, doesn't really matter. You see that that's how the world works. Who is the most influential people? If you're a billionaire, them to you, and they think, oh, you're a billionaire? So that means you must have some qualification to live and to sort of guide us in our society. But doesn't really make sense, because there's no correlation necessarily between how much money you have and what your actual character is. But as Kali Yuga progresses, as society becomes more and more industrial, and as your position in society is determined more and more by how much money you have, character becomes less and less relevant. And now your position in society will be determined by your technical education. Are you able to, understand computer code, or are you able to understand, to manage things, or do you understand the intricacies of modern finance? And if you can do these things, then you can get money, and then you can be respectable. So it's all part of the same way of thinking that value and worth is coming from the gross, and not understanding that it comes from the subtle. And then Prabhupada created ISKCON to create people who have Brahmanical character. That's our focus. We're not interested in diplomas or characteristics or external things. We are interested in creating people of character. And we think that that is very valuable, and that will ultimately save society. And that's very important to keep that in mind, that even these external things, if you say, oh, I become a Brahmana and I get a Brahmana thread, but the question is not really whether you have the thread. The question is, do you have the qualities of a Brahmana? And if some other individual who might seem to be, not necessarily initiated or whatever, but the reality is what is his qualities? I mean, there's that famous story of, what's his name? Satya was in the Mahabharata, the boy who wanted to take initiation. And then he went to his mother, Jalaba, Satyakama. So there's a story of Satyakama, who wanted to become a Brahmana. And he went to Guru and he said, I want to take initiation. The Guru said, well, what is your gotra? What is your lineage? Where do you come from? Who is your father, and are you born? What family are you born in? He says, okay, I will ask my mother. And he goes to his mother, Jalaba, and he says, Mother, I want to become a Brahmana, I want to take initiation. But the Guru has asked, what is my gotra? Who is my father? And Jalaba says, unfortunately, I don't know who is your father. There's few different options, few different men who passed through. So I don't actually know which one was your father. So that means, obviously, most likely a prostitute. So he went, so Satyakama says, okay, what can I don't know, my mother doesn't know. He went to the Guru, and the Guru asked, so what is your gotra? He says, my mother says she doesn't know who is my father. And then the Guru says, only a Brahmana can be this honest, can just honestly say what is the true situation, even though it's a little embarrassing, but he just spoke the truth. So the Guru says, okay, I will give you initiation, I will accept you, and I will train you as a Brahmana. So the point is that the subtle characteristics are very difficult to judge. And Prabhupada would also therefore say, he said in the Krishna book, that the real measure of greatness is tested by how a person can tolerate difficult circumstances. So that a person's character is illustrated really by, it's tested by the world. So if you look at Prabhupada's life, then you see how, through Prabhupada's life, various stages at the end, you saw how he dealt with difficult circumstances. And that shows you who he really was. The glories came out. Shows how determined he was in Krishna's service. Shows how he dealt with all his various experiences. So character and spiritual advancement, very difficult to judge. Very, very difficult to judge. Not like money, which is, we can, if we get access to everyone's bank account here, we can see, we can make a number, and we can rank, and we can say, okay, who has the most? Probably Chaitanya Nanda. And we list them up here. We make a list, and we say, who's right at the bottom? I don't know. And then we can put a number on everyone, and we can say, okay, who is the most valuable here? Who is the highest net worth? And we can say, that's him. It's a very specific number. But the spiritual qualification, how do you do that? Who is the most spiritual advanced? Who knows? Who knows? Who knows who is the most advanced? Who is the most dear to Krishna? We don't know. Who is the strongest character? We don't know. Because character is tested. Ramakrishna Maharaj tells a story how, if you look at the Western world looks very nice sometimes. Sometimes you go to the third world, it looks very crazy. And the Western world looks like people are, very civilized and calm, whatever. But actually, it's just dependent on so many arrangements that make people look very peaceful and polite. It says he was on a train in Europe, and then at some point, the train stopped. And people like, what's happening? I mean, no, the trains in Europe, there's never problems with the trains. And they said, sorry, like there's a problem with the train. You will have to walk 2 miles or whatever to the next station. So people had to climb out. It was not like a subway, it was like a overland rail. So they had to climb out of the train, and people were like very upset, and this is absurd, what's happening here? So they had to walk. And as they walked, when they saw at the end, they saw that there was only 1 or 2 buses, shuttle buses, that will take them to the next station. But there was a whole bunch of people on the train. And Maharaj said that then what happened is people just went wild again. People just started pushing people out of the way and running because they wanted to be first to get on the bus. And old ladies, whatever, no one cared. It was just I want to get first because I want to get into the bus. So he said it is very interesting, all these people who look so polite and they sit on the train, but it's only when the arrangements are going good, then people can be polite. But when things get tough, when people really have to choose, is it me or is it you? Then you see what are the characteristics that come out. And you see how people are tested in times of great difficulty. We see also, if you look at some amazing stories about people also, for example, say in World War II, who risked their own lives to save people, and other people who didn't do anything. So difficult times show you that's where the character comes out. It's very difficult to judge otherwise. But that's the same thing we're seeing here in this principle, to understand that really your external life, the conditions of your life, is going to be determined to a large part by the conditions of your heart. And therefore, education, in the Vedic sense, was primarily made to shape a person's character, to take young people and to try to give them certain qualities and characteristics to shape their character so that when they go out into the world, that internal condition is properly organized, and then they'll be able to manifest an exterior life that is peaceful, stable, and prosperous. But in Kali Yuga, that is not what education is for. People go to college. College is probably one of the most degrading experiences you can have in the modern world. You can have kids who have relatively good qualities. They've been protected by their parents to a large part. And then they go to college and they just completely whack out. College just, completely degrades you like anything. Because that's what the college experience is all about. And at the end, after 4 years of college, you go out there and you're, a semi-alcoholic, and you've done all kinds of crazy things with the opposite sex, and now you start working and think about marriage. So, what to speak of the fact that you're going to probably be in debt. So we see that Kali Yuga just not really understanding even how material prosperity works. So therefore the Vedic thing is we understand that the subtle determines the conditions of the gross, but at the same time, because we are conditioned souls, the conditions of the gross reality will also influence us a lot. So therefore we see that there's a great emphasis being placed also on taking the material energy and trying to arrange it as best as we can so that it cannot completely agitate us or make us go crazy. Because the gross reality, depending on how detached you are, but most of us aren't that detached, it means that we need a certain level of peace and comfort and good health to be able to stay properly situated in our minds. So therefore we see that it's not that the material reality is neglected. Emphasis is placed on good character and proper conduct, but then at the same time there's a lot of advice and guidance for also creating an external reality that is favorable for a peaceful situation. And therefore we see the mode of goodness, so much emphasis is placed on apparently external things. What you eat, take a shower regularly, to speak in a certain way. All these gross things, these external things, they help us also in creating an internal reality that is peaceful and calm. If we look at the Mahabharata is a very important text. I think that in our temples we have a huge emphasis being placed naturally on the transcendental culture, because that is the heart. Like the soul is the most important thing. Without the soul, everything is useless. So therefore we see, Prabhupada explains that the Bhagavad Gita is the entry point into real intellectual civilization. into a civilization that understands the difference between matter and spirit. So the Bhagavad Gita brings us to this point, understanding that you're a spirit soul, and your duty is to surrender unto God. And we see that the climax of the Bhagavad Gita is just that. Just perform your duties, understanding how to perform your material duties in a proper way, but at the end, understand that the goal is you have to, surrender unto Krishna. But the question is, okay, you read the Bhagavad Gita, you come to that point, you say, okay, I accept, I have to surrender to Krishna. But then the question is, okay, well, what do you do then? I'm willing to surrender to Krishna, but what comes after that? What's the next step? How does that look? And Prabhupada says, therefore, after that is the Bhagavatam, which is the culture of the soul proper. Meaning that in the Bhagavatam, we see how it looks. Once people say they surrender to Krishna, well, how do their lives turn out? And then we see all these various devotees in the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam's focus is mostly on the devotees, actually. The 10th canto naturally focuses on Krishna, but a lot of the pastimes, for example, if you read the pastime of Prahlad and Nrsimha, you see that in other Puranas, the focus is oftentimes on Nrsimhadev. But in the Bhagavatam, most of the focus is on Prahlad Maharaj. How did he grow up? What is his experience? Most of the teachings is based on Prahlad Maharaj's teachings to his friends. So a lot of the Bhagavatam is then focusing on the experience of the devotee and various devotees who have come to the point of surrendering to Krishna, but who are struggling with what that means. And sometimes it's not that they're all necessarily pure. We see that Ajamil was also someone that surrendered, but in very different conditions than Prahlad. So the point is that the Bhagavatam then shows us, okay, once you surrender to Krishna, how does it in your life? And that's very important, and that's always the key factor. But then the Bhagavad Gita should not be neglected. And therefore Prabhupada, to a large part, after the Gaudiya Math collapsed, and Prabhupada was preaching in India without an institutional backing, we see that how Prabhupada would style himself, how Prabhupada would introduce himself, how Prabhupada would present himself to the world in his effort to get the message of Krishna consciousness out there. He would present himself as a preacher of the Bhagavad Gita. Very much so. In his letters, in his things, that's the first book he translated is the Bhagavad Gita, and Prabhupada was trying to Prabhupada really made that the main focus of what he's trying to teach people. And for society at large, that's what people need. First, people have to come to this point of surrendering to Krishna, and that's what the Bhagavad Gita does. It takes us from wherever we are and brings us to this point. And the Mahabharata then, after understood, is part of that same level. The Bhagavad Gita is the culmination of the Mahabharata. But so much in the Mahabharata is also there to help us deal with the realities of life. Marriage, money, family, these are the things that we also have to figure out, because if these things aren't properly figured out, they can cause a big mess. They can cause a huge mess in your life, and it makes your life very complicated. So, and oftentimes we see devotees, we try to surrender and get into that high-level culture, but then when we go down and we try to organize our material life, then somehow we turn to other shelters, or we try to do it however our parents perhaps did it, or we try to go we see what other people are doing, or we read some kind of books from some psychologists who try to explain to us how you're going to be happy and have a good marriage. But really, there's no need to turn out. We should turn within our own culture. The culture of the Bhagavat also can help us figure these things out, and therefore it has to be more developed. So the Mahabharata is very fascinating, because the Mahabharata is really dealing with life, real life. And so much of the Mahabharata deals with the question of virtue. What does it mean to be virtuous? And our society has in the past been marred by something that is technically called antinomianism, which means this idea that I'm so transcendental that I'm above the law. Because I'm a devotee, I can do whatever I want. And we neglect the basic realities of life. But you will see that you can be rudely awakened, because the material world is still what it is. These things work on certain rules. So for example, if you want to, whatever it is, health, the basic principles of just having a general good life that will make us satisfied, there are rules for abiding. So we see that that's a culture. The Prabhupada didn't say, he would quote a lot of slokas, and in his personal guidance of different people, he really helped people to try to guide them to to live a life that is virtuous. Because when we start seeing, as I said before, something like depression, and now they think the solution is in brain chemistry, or they look at the different problems of the world and they see, you know, what is the solution, and they try to come up with some solutions. But the solution for external situations that are not how it should be is virtuous behavior. That is the solution, is the principles of virtue. Self-restraint, discipline, keeping at a distance the modes of passion and ignorance. That is what will bring you just basic material happiness and prosperity, some level of peace and prosperity and happiness that we all need to continue to exist in this world. So we have to really turn to virtue, and we have to understand that just because we are making an attempt to surrender to Krishna doesn't absolve us from the realities of what virtuous behavior means. We see that when someone asks Srila Prabhupada, what does it mean? How will we know who is your disciple? How will we know what does it mean to be a devotee? And what did Prabhupada say? Prabhupada says, a devotee will be a perfect gentleman, meaning that there's this element of virtuous behavior that naturally also comes to those who are really interested in surrendering to Krishna. So we see that that same principle, as we are here being explained, the realities of Samkhya, the fundamental principles of material nature, there's also the fundamental principles of proper material behavior that are important, that can help us and guide us as we go through these various stages of life. Because the material energy is very, very powerful, and the modes of passion and ignorance are very, very powerful. So we have to really try our best to keep it at a distance. And it is a combined effort, between, firstly, naturally, as far as possible, and with as much enthusiasm we can muster, to take shelter of Krishna's lotus feet, to hear and chant about the transcendental activities and the holy name of Krishna. Without that, there is no hope. There is no hope, because that is the lifeblood of any attempt or any hope we can have to even act virtuous in the beginning. Because the principle of devotional service becomes situated in virtuous behavior. So that's the basic principle first, is to hear and chant and remember Krishna in all stages of life, regardless of what we have done. Even if we have made big mistakes or if we are really struggling, just keep the transcendental vibration going. That is the core of it. But then, and as we are able to do that, to then also try our best. As Prabhupada said in the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he said, those who desire I can't remember the exact, actually let me read it here. He says, Prabhupada said that Prabhupada says the prominence of certain modes of nature is manifested in one's dealings, in his activities, in eating, etc. So in all these practical things, that's where the modes come out. But Prabhupada says, but if one wants, he can develop by practice the mode of goodness, and thus defeat the modes of ignorance and passion. So if one is determined, he can be blessed by the mode of goodness. And by transcending the mode of goodness, he can be situated in pure goodness, which is called the Vasudeva state, a state in which one can understand the signs of God. So Karamakanam Maharaj always used to point out, he says really, it's not, the injunction is not necessarily to be in the mode of goodness, because that's very difficult. The injunction is to associate with the mode of goodness, to try our best to keep that sangha, to get some goodness coming into our life as much as we can, in various ways, to understand more and more how these principles operate and what can we do to bring some goodness into our life. What can we do to associate with some of that principles? And a large part of the culture that Prabhupada has given us is built into that culture, a culture in which there's an emphasis on cleanliness and regulation and purity, a culture of respect, a culture of thoughtfulness, a culture of self-restraint, in which we do not waste. All these are the basic principles that we can bring into our life. But it is up to us to decide how much will I bring this into my life. At the end, even if you stay in the temple, there's a basic element of that which you have to follow. You have to be at Mangal Arti, otherwise Prabhu Vishnu will mark you absent and everyone will see. So we're like, okay, so we know we have to be here in the morning. Or there's an element of, if it goes completely out of whack, like if you're going to start become completely disrespectful towards other people, it will come out, and then you will either be asked to leave or you will have to adjust your behavior. So at least in the temple we're protected to a large part. But that is really the beginning. It's really about ourselves deciding and how much faith do we really have in this culture, the culture of Krishna consciousness, and a culture, Brahminical culture, and how much will we try to really take shelter of that culture as we try to figure out the details of our life. But at the same time being practical, because the material world now is very topsy-turvy, as Prabhupada used to say. So it's not necessarily, very few of us we will have to make do with whatever we have, and the world is a little complicated. But using these principles as guidelines is very important. We see in the Mahabharata, a very interesting section. It was, I believe, the 12th or the 13th day of the war. We see that at that point things are starting to go difficult. And usually how the war used to happen, the rules of the engagement was that they would only fight during the daytime. So in the morning it was very peaceful. Everybody would wake up, they would do their puja, do their puja, be calm, do Mangal Arti, take some breakfast. There was like, everybody had tents and there was like so much arrangements and there was cooks, because the idea is that, it's a war, but we're going to do it in a civilized way. It's very calm, morning way, wake up. And then once the sun comes up, then war begins. Then they all assemble, and before the time is marked by the blowing of the conches, which means before then no one is going to shoot arrows. It's like just like if you play a football game or something. It's like you have to wait until the whistle blows. Otherwise you can't just start running and tackling people. You have to wait until the whistle comes. So then they would all assemble in their various formations. Every day there would be different formations that they would choose, the various vyuhas, as they call it. And then the conches would blow, and then the battle would start. And then they would fight until the sun sets. And then the conches blow, and then that's the end of the day's war. Then everybody would go back to their camps, and they would go take some dinner, and they would even go to the opposite camps. They would go back and forth. Different. It's like at the end of the game is over, then they can be friends again. It's crazy for us to imagine that, but it's a culture in which people really understand that they're not a body. They really understood that the soul is eternal and death is just not really such a big deal. So even if now I'm like trying to kill this other person, at the end they could lay down, there's no hatred or anger. It's just, this is just what we do. And if I die in the battlefield, it's okay, because I go back to God, I go back to the heavenly planets. And if I kill you, then I win victory. So it was like very difficult for us to imagine a culture in which people really understand that they're not the body. So, but at some point, as the battle drew on, they became very tired and exhausted, and they wanted the battle to end. So at one day, as the fighting was going on, they just didn't stop. They just decided they'll just continue fighting. So even then it became dark, and they continued fighting, and the fighting just went on. They were fighting in the dark. It's very scary when you see the descriptions, because you imagine also there was no floodlights. There was no Monday night lights. It was lighting of the battlefield. It was very dark, and it was something that they were also not used to, fighting in those kind of conditions. But there was some individuals who were greatly enthused by the darkness, and that was Gatotkacha and his Rakshasa friends, who were fighting on behalf of the Pandavas. So we know that Gatotkacha was the son of Bhima and Hidimbi. So half Rakshasa, and these Rakshasas, they are very similar to what we know as vampires, creatures that drink blood, and specifically also eat people. And Gatotkacha was, even though he was the son of Hidimbi, at the same time he was, he grew up with his mother. So he was a Rakshasa. It's explained how Gatotkacha's chariot, he was completely black, and it was decorated with all these human skulls, and he had these black horses. So he was just quite a sight. So Gatotkacha was fighting on behalf of the Pandavas. But when it became dark, the thing with the Rakshasas are their real power manifests when it becomes dark. So then these Rakshasas just they became so powerful, and they started to just slaughter all these Kuru warriors. And Ghototkacha was just causing havoc. And it was getting to the point where they realized that if they don't stop these Rakshasas now, it's like the whole Kuru army is going to be annihilated. So then Duryodhana told Karna. Karna had gotten a special dart from Lord Indra, a special dart that cannot be stopped. If that dart was thrown, a certain weapon that it just nothing can stop it. No one will be able to stop it. So he was sparing this dart naturally for Arjuna, who was his real nemesis. But Duryodhana told Karna, just throw it, throw this dart. Just, you have to stop Ghototkacha. You're the only person who can stop him now, otherwise everything is over. So then Karna accepted, okay, yes, this is it. He will surrender his weapon, and he will, do what's best for everyone, and he will take out Ghototkacha. So they said that at that point, just when Karna was, chanting the mantras to activate this weapon, and it became clear he's going to now throw it to Ghototkacha, Arjuna and Krishna saw what was happening. And Arjuna, he wanted to save Ghototkacha because Ghototkacha was his nephew. Ghototkacha was so loyal to the Pandavas. He was always fighting for the Pandava cause. And there's different stages of the Mahabharata where they would call Ghototkacha and he would appear and he would help them. It was really, he really loved the Pandavas. But he was a vampire. He was a Rakshasa. So when Arjuna raised his bow and he wanted to stop Ghototkacha, wanted to save Ghototkacha, and wanted to stop Karna from throwing that arrow, Krishna stopped him. Krishna said, no, just let it happen. And then the arrow was, and there was, things happened very quickly. So Krishna stopped him, and then he threw the arrow and it hit Ghototkacha right in the heart, and Ghototkacha's heart exploded and he died. And then afterwards, after the battle, Arjuna asked Krishna, he says, why did you stop me from saving Ghototkacha? He says, why did you stop me? He says, Ghototkacha is loyal to the Pandavas. He is such a dear fighter. Why did you stop me? And then Krishna told him, very interesting. Krishna said, even though he is loyal to the Pandavas, Krishna said, at the end, if someone is not a follower of Brahminical culture, he cannot really be my devotee. He cannot really be protected by me. He cannot really fully come under my protection. So it was an interesting point that in Kali Yuga, with Lord Chaitanya's mercy, yes, we come from Asuric and Rashasic backgrounds. Our cultures are that of passion and ignorance that we come from. And we get some time to figure our stuff out and try to clean up our act. And we are eligible for Lord Chaitanya's mercy because he does not reject us. But at some point, we really have to work hard to make that transition into Brahminical culture if we really want the full shelter of Krishna's lotus feet. We really want to be fully protected by him. And to the extent that we stay connected to Asuri culture, Rakshasa culture, cultures of passion and ignorance, these things will come between us and Krishna. Do not doubt it. It's not so easy to let it go. We have to keep working on it. And Krishna also says, Apichet Suduracharo, if that individual, if you are really sincerely trying your best to move towards Krishna's ideals, then you are still a sadhu, a saintly person. But it has to be understood that that change of heart has to happen for us to really fully become under Krishna's shelter. Otherwise, that full protection will not be there. So, keeping that in mind, from these verses, we see how this is explained. The material energy is created, the gross manifesting from the subtle, and that understanding the implications of that. What it means is that even in our life, to understand that yes, the external situations of our life, how much money we have, where we live, all these specific external things, they are important because they do influence us a lot. But at the end, the primary thing is the reality that the spiritual internal reality is what should take the most of our priority. Never to sacrifice the internal for the external. And always keeping that in mind, because at the end, it is the internal condition that determines the externals of our reality. And of that knowledge is understanding that virtuous behavior is always key. To really have a proper understanding what it means to be virtuous, how to properly deal with other people, and as we enter into different realities of life, what it means to be a spouse, what it means to be a parent, what does it mean to be a disciple, what does it mean to be a member of a community. Virtuous behavior is always a very various duties that we have in our life. So the clearer we understand these things, and the more sincerely we try to organize our life according to these ideals and try our best to move in that direction, we will become more under Krishna. Because Krishna is Namo Brahmanyaya Devaya Go Brahmana Hitaya Cha. He is the Lord of the cows and the Brahmanas. He's the Lord of those individuals who are loyal to Brahmanical principles. And that is the challenge that we all face in this world. So let us hear if there are any questions or any comments or anything that has been said today. Yes, Dr. Ryan.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. That's good enough.
Yeah, it's good.
Thank you so much for the class. Always so enlivening when you give class here. I'm wondering, first of all, if you could say more about how it is that a devotee can be trying to surrender to Krishna and also still engaging in Rakshasa, asuric sort of principles. It seems like people are trying to be devotees. Usually the standard path to follow is to go through the Brahminical qualities. Is there any other way? I don't fully understand that. And the other thing is, or maybe just do that question.
Yeah, so the point is that we don't all start from the same place. The material conditioning is very, very powerful, extremely powerful. It's like addictions. They cannot just be stopped. It depends on the strength of the addiction. So therefore, there is no one same path for everyone, because we're not starting from a blank slate. It's not that we're all born and we're all just sort of equal, and then we all take the Krishna consciousness and then sort of, it's supposed to be an equal race. It's not like that at all, because it's dependent on what we have done in our last life and the life before and the million lives that came before that. So we all start from completely different perspectives, completely different places, and therefore what for one person is easy, to take the Brahmanical culture more easily and follow certain principles, for someone else it can be extremely difficult. And therefore it has to be always kept in mind. You cannot necessarily judge the sincerity of the person based on the externals of their life, because you don't know. You don't understand how strong someone else's suffering is, how strong their difficulty is, how strong their conditioning is. And therefore, there's the principle, Prabhupada said, the Varnashram Dharma is based on that principle. The idea is that different people should be given different duties and different levels of responsibility according to their adhikar, which come from the kind of conditioning that they have. And our culture is also, as we develop socially, we will see that that's what's going to happen. The easiest is if everyone just renounces everything and moves into the temple. Simple. No problem, no issues. Just forget about getting married, forget about any kind of forget about children, forget about making money. You just live in the temple, take prasadam, and you go on Harinam, and then you will have no problems in your life. And that is definitely, this is the simplest solution, the best solution to do. But the problem is not everyone can do that. So what are you going to do with those people? What are we doing with those people? Because it's not possible for everyone, because people's conditioning is different. The strength of people's desire is different. And it also has to be said, it's not necessarily if you don't do that, that means you're not different. Even people who are pure have different missions in life, different things that they have to do. So unity and diversity is Prabhupada's principle. So we have to understand that, we have to make facility for the fact that different people are on different levels of their spiritual life. And it's important to see that Krishna's instruction is relevant for everyone. So how hard people are trying, we don't really know. And we cannot just say, sometimes for some people they can have different battles in their life. If someone comes to the temple and is addicted to heroin, then that's going to be the first thing. Let's see what we can do to get him off hard drugs. If he smokes cigarettes, it's maybe not, it's not so bad. It's not really the main thing now. Smoking cigarettes is not such a bad thing compared to taking heroin. But if you would start smoking cigarettes, then we would have a big problem. Because you're not supposed to be smoking cigarettes. You have no excuse to smoke cigarettes. You understand the principle that it's different people are on different levels and they have different battles and different things that they have to fight through. But our society is to help everyone. And we saw that even in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, we see that therefore he preached among everyone. all kinds of different classes of people, Jagais and Madhais, all these various characters. He would connect with them and help people move through very difficult conditions. And Prabhupada was the same. Many of Prabhupada practically dealt also with many disciples who were struggling. And you see in his guidance how he would help people. So if you yourself are finding it more easier to be situated in Brahminical culture, well, count yourself lucky. And don't become, no, I'm saying you, I'm saying in general. The problem, as Prabhupada said, with the mode of goodness is as we become situated in the mode of goodness, the problem is we become proud. Because we think, hey, this is not, no, this is easy. What's the problem? Why are these other people so useless that they're not able to do that? And Prabhupada said that that is what basically destroyed Vedic culture. We see that Shringi, his cursing of Maharaj Parikshit was based on judging the king so harshly for such a simple thing. He's a king. He was hunting. Okay, he lost his temper a little bit. What's the problem? But you saw that then Shringi cursed him harshly due to his own pride in the fact that he was, situated in Brahminical life, and then the whole thing collapsed. So in this way, we need the various different sections of society to all be working together to move through difficult. And that's really what the Prabhupada created Brahmanas. The idea with ISKCON was to create Brahminical individuals who can then help the rest of society who might not be able to come to the Brahminical platform, to help them also in living their lives and somehow getting closer and closer to Krishna. So sincerity is, it will look different for different people. And we cannot judge, again, you cannot just, based on someone's external position, think, oh, this person is sincere, this person is not sincere. And you hear it a lot in the movement. Oh, this person is a nonsense. You have to be a little careful. Just start saying who is not sincere and who is sincere. It's very difficult to judge. And therefore if we want to be a merciful movement, we have to really take into account where people are at and what people are doing actually. Not necessarily just seeing what level people are, but thinking, what are people doing to stay at that level? And how far have they come to be there? Having that vision also really helps put things in perspective. Any other questions? Yes, Janaki.
Hare Krishna. I just want to say, I have a comment. And when I read this verse, when we read it, the first thing that I thought was like, how the heck is what is he gonna say about this? Because it was totally over my head. But really wonderful class, thank you. And one thing that you said though, that kind of like, I don't know, like, kind of like raised a little thing, was that we have to turn to our culture because our answers are there. And specifically you said, like, psychologically, we might try to affect our like material lives, and we turn to like material means, and so I was just thinking that sometimes like the first class student can hear Bhagavatam and just understand. The first class student can just hear Bhagavatam and understand, and that's really great. But a lot of people are not first class learners, and so the second class learner might be able to see and then learn, and then the third just doesn't learn really at all.
And the third learns by experience himself.
Experiencing, yes.
And the fourth one doesn't learn at all.
Yeah. And but I was just thinking that sometimes it is necessary, because we also hear that you chant Hare Krishna and all good qualities will come. But then we see that people chant Hare Krishna and maybe they become, their character shows something that is opposite of what is Vaishnava. We see karmis and we feel disgust, but we don't feel compassion. We just think us versus them. Or like it's Brahminical to take care of women and children and cows and the brahmanas and that. But then we see that women and children have not been treated so kindly in ISKCON's history. And so my Guru Maharaj, the last like year or 2 years maybe, he's been doing a lot of self-care retreats and talking about this. And he says that if you chant Hare Krishna and it brings all good qualities, then that's great. But if it doesn't, then it's your responsibility. Then you have to take responsibility to cultivate those good qualities and find them however you can. And so I was just thinking that, yeah, it's important to note that it's our responsibility to take awareness of our material kind of position and not just rely on this spiritual knowledge to fix all our problems, like spiritually bypass.
Yeah, I think that the point is not that, see, the problem is not that, it's not that whether the question of chanting Hare Krishna is effective. The problem is what are you doing the times when you're not chanting Hare Krishna? And that's the difficulty. The reality is that most people, they're not actually fully absorbed. They still stay absorbed in material stuff, mundane thoughts, mundane literature, mundane so many things. And that's why the process is going to be weakened. So we see Bhaktisiddhanta told that story. It says there was a bride and groom, they got married, and then they were going on their honeymoon, and they went on a boat. And then it was in the evening, so it was like at the end of the day, and they went on this boat, and then it was already dark, and then they started to row, because they were going like to his village, which was, you know, down the river. So they were rowing and rowing the whole night. And then the next day when the sun comes up, they realized they haven't moved at all. And they were like, what happened? And they said the problem was they forgot to lift up the anchor. The anchor was still there. So he was rowing the whole night, but they didn't go anywhere. So similarly, there's a culture surrounding the practice of sadhana bhakti. So even if you're going to engage in the practices of sadhana bhakti, which means you're going to chant maybe something and whatever, but the rest of your life is still anchored into, you know, passion and ignorance, then how much are you going to be moving forward? So that's also what we see, that, and therefore, like you're saying, you have to, and that is your responsibility. We see in the Krishna book, there's the story of, everyone is welcome to go. And so probably soon chastise me for going over time, but if you want to go, you're welcome to go. You see that there is the demons that are killed by Krishna, and then there's the demons that are killed by Balaram in the Krishna book. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains how these demons, they all represent different anarthas. So some of those demons, only Krishna can kill them. That's like, you have to depend on Krishna's mercy to rip that out of your heart. But the demons that are killed by Balaram, they represent that have to be killed by the disciples' own effort. That is your responsibility. You and your guru, basically. You have to follow the instructions of your guru to overcome these difficult things. So, for example, we have Dvivira gorilla. So Dvivira gorilla represents uncultured behavior. He was a gorilla. He was just a monkey, acting like a monkey, doing monkey things, and not properly culturing himself. But he was killed by Balaram. So the point is that if you want to stop being a monkey, it is your responsibility. You have to do that. You have to work on that and take responsibility to really take up higher levels of culture. So therefore, that's that principle of like you're saying, there is this principle, we have to do quite a lot to also culture these qualities, because we are not just given a mantra, we are given a mantra and a bunch of instructions that come with it. There's a culture of, and therefore the principle is to do whatever is favorable for devotional service, whatever is not. And that is really the criteria of surrender. The question of whether you surrender is, are you able to adopt what is favorable and to reject what is unfavorable? And therefore Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that the Swarup Lakshana of the Vaishnava is surrender. That is the actual root quality from which all other qualities come. But surrender does not just mean that you put on tilak and you say, oh, I'm a Hare Krishna and I chant. Surrender means that you actually practically go look in your life and you say, what are the things that are favorable, and I will do these things. And what are the things that are unfavorable, I will not do these things. That is surrender. So therefore, if you were surrender, all good qualities will come. But it actually means something. It's not just a label. So in that way, but a large part also, and we'll end off with that, is that therefore we have to get some knowledge of the actual culture. The knowledge of what does virtue mean. If you read the Mahabharata, so many times Vidura speaks to Dhritarashtra. So many good advice he gives there. Vidura says that if you speak too much, how much ruin that brings into your life, how much that disturbs your mind, how much that will shorten your lifespan. And he speaks about spending money, and he speaks about what are the duties of a wife, the duties of a husband, very practical things. So these things, they show us clearly what is favorable and what is unfavorable, because someone has to point it out to us. Because otherwise, what we do is we act according to our conditioning. Where do we get our conditioning from? to a large part from our parents and from whoever our friends were when we were growing up. We just do whatever we see other people were doing. So if you're going to make that the basis of your behavior, then you're probably going to be in trouble. So therefore we have to go get the knowledge. Okay, what is favorable and what is not favorable? And that is something we have to work on repeatedly in our life, because as we go through different stages, different things come up. And also as we progress, we become more and more refined. And we see certain things that we used to do. We realize, hey, I shouldn't actually be doing this. Because, we also, as we progress in spiritual life, become more aware of certain things, and then some things have to go. Some things which might have been there for a long time, but then now it's time for it to go. So in that way, understanding clearly what is favorable, what is unfavorable, and that is the principles of virtue, and that is our responsibility. We have to really put some work into that, and then we can, and by Krishna's mercy, then also that full purification of the heart can happen by Krishna's mercy. Grantara Śrimad Bhāgavatam ki, Śrīla Prabhupada ki, Go Premanande.